For thousands of years, crashing waves buffeted the craggy shoreline of a tiny sun-drenched island in the Atlantic called Borokeen. It is here that the wind never stops blowing, whispering tales of battered bulwarks that rise high above the emerald sea. Legend tells of life and love lost in heroic battle. It is said that on a moonlit night, a young woman dressed in white haunts the ancient forts of old San Juan in search of her lost love. These massive walls tell the story of discovery in a time when treasure was wondrous, new lands with their hidden wealth. Colossal sailing ships stretched from one corner of the world to the other, and the seas were filled with pirates. Even Christopher Columbus and Don Juan Ponce de Leon, on their second voyage of discovery, sailed into this beautiful Caribbean harbor to resupply their ships for their quest of gold and the elusive fountain of youth. 15 years later, when Ponce de Leon returned, he renamed the harbor Puerto Rico, or Rich Port. Spain was the conquering queen, and Puerto Rico, her prized jewel, recognized for her strategic site as the gateway to the Caribbean. Here the shores near the harbor are protective and steep. The craggy headland rises over 100 feet above the sea, surrounded by jagged reefs that create a perfect natural defense for fortification of both land and sea. And that was Spain's quest, not only to control her new colonies in America, but the endless sea as well. Such a prize as Puerto Rico could not go unchallenged. At first, the native Taino Indians, who by nature were friendly, peaceful farmers, welcomed the white gods from the sea. But as the colony flourished and men exploited the Indians, the Tainos fought for their lands, burning the church and huts in Capara. Only their fear that the Spaniards were immortal kept the Tainos from full battle. But the Spaniards had power, horses, spike-collared war dogs, and gunpowder. Unfortunately, Capara was not well located. In 1519, the seat of government was moved to what we now call San Juan. Daily rains, cooling breezes, and the harbor made it the best and most beautiful sight in the world. Ponce de Leon left his family to build Casablanca and settle San Juan. His quest was America, to colonize Florida. Sadly, he never returned to Puerto Rico alive. A Calusa Indian's arrow took his life. He was laid to rest in San Jose Church, the oldest church on the island. Later, his remains were moved to the altar of the stately Metropolitan Cathedral in Old San Juan. Spain's new colony was not long left undisturbed. The cannibalistic Carib Indians of the Lesser Antilles now pushed into the westerly islands with their savage raids and threatened Puerto Rico. If Spain did not maintain a strong hold on San Juan, she could lose other colonies in America. The 16th century was the great age of the Spanish treasure fleets that carried gold, silver, emeralds, and pearls from the Americas back to Spain. Puerto Rico was the strategic stopover point to the Americas. The most valuable of all the island's treasure was cached in this ancient wooden box, the chest of the Three Keys. Here, not only were the riches of the city securely locked away, but also the priceless treasures from fleets that moored in the harbor. This was pirates' plunder. Today, this ancient chest resides in the Seminario Conciliar, the first college institution on the island. It was here that most of the people to become important in Puerto Rico's early political history studied. Scholars continue to pore over the library's excellent collection of Puerto Rican history. The Seminario Conciliar reflects Spanish architecture at its finest. Because Spain's goal was to conquer and hold many new colonies in the Americas, she declared the Caribbean a mare clausum, a closed sea. All unauthorized ships were subject to seizure. Of course, other countries rejected Spain's monopoly of the sea and angrily disregarded the Spanish ban on foreign trade. Piracy became rampant on all sides, often sanctioned by government. Even in Puerto Rico, many of the king's men who had not been paid for months joined the plunder just to survive. Nor was piracy altogether unwelcome. Trade and barter was essential for existence. Slaves, farm equipment, and cloth were exchanged for cattle, ginger, tobacco, coffee, and fruit. Piracy became profitable to both colonist and corsair alike. But Spain's threat was more than pirates. The English, Dutch, and French were fixated on Spain's newly acquired American colonies. Their intent was to invade, cut supply lines, attack, and occupy. In short, to get a toehold on the Caribbean. Spain soon realized that in order to defend her other colonies, she needed to fortify Puerto Rico as the gateway or eastern entrance to the Caribbean. In 1533, city officials gathered to open the honored chest of the Three Keys to withdraw 400 pesos to begin fortification of San Juan. Construction had not even started before the marauding Carib Indians attacked. The funds for the fort were depleted in trying to arm the defense. But by 1537, the walls of La Fortaleza began to rise. The fort with its 7-foot-thick walls provided safety for the people of San Juan. But as with Capara, the site was wrong. The historian Gonzalo Fernandez de Oviedo wrote back to Spain that only blind men could have chosen such a site for a fort. Oviedo said the fort should have been built as a lofty watchtower on El Morro, the rocky headland at the entrance to the harbor. Oviedo was right. In 1539, the Crown approved 400 pesos to begin work at Castillo de San Felipe del Morro, or Fort St. Philip of the headland. La Fortaleza was assigned to serve as the residence for governors and other royal officials, and designated as the original repository of the chest of the Three Keys. Fortunately, building materials for El Morro were plentiful on the island. Sandstone, limestone, and good clay for brick and tile. Soon quarries dotted the Atlantic shore. Limestone was calcined into lime to cement bricks for fort construction. Walls grew to be 18 feet thick and to rise 140 feet from the sea. Iron, cannons, and cannonballs were imported. A 1580 inventory shows an order for 500 cannonballs and 1,200 weight of powder. A man-of-war ship was a floating fortress with a thick hull and towering masts and a cannon in 2 or more tiers with musketeers perched in the crow's nest. El Morro was designed to dismantle such ships. Cannon tiers were designed to destroy ships with cannon fire from 6 different levels. At sea level, hot-shot cannonballs heated to a red-hot glow ignited hulls. Gunners on 2nd and 3rd tiers aimed for deck and sail damage. Higher tiers covered land defense. A barrier moat was defended by gunners perched on walls. This is the place where men lived and died. The courtyard was the center of social and military life, with its huge water cisterns, kitchen, chapel, and winding stone staircases. Massively powerful, yet ethereal in grace, El Morro stands today as a memorial to Spain's valiant artillerymen. Across the channel, the Spaniards built the fort of San Juan de la Cruz, or St. John of the Cross. Today it is called El Cañuelo, after the tiny island it is built upon. This defense created a crossfire from El Morro to protect the mouth of the Bayamon River. As grand as were the King of Spain's plans for fortification, and as magnificent as the fortifications now stand, today we look back at history not only with compassion for the pain and struggle of power, but also with amusement at mankind's foibles. Initially, 3 cannons were set inside the vaulted first tower of El Morro. When the cannons fired, smoke filled the tower, blinding and choking the gunners. Today we see that the cannons were moved to stand outside on the tiers. Although attempts were made by more powerful intruders to take the island, by some fate of good fortune, Spain held Puerto Rico. The English pirate Sir Francis Drake boldly anchored his fleet within range of Boquerón. The prize? A crippled Spanish treasure galleon. El Morro opened fire and hit the bullseye, Drake's own cabin, splintering the stool right from under him as he sat at supper. In retaliation, Drake attacked by night with 1,500 men. Their mistake? Setting the frigates afire. The harbor lit up like midday, foiling their own secret attack and making themselves a perfect target. The Spanish treasure lay safe in La Fortaleza. England sailed 21 warships into the Caribbean. Their mission? To march 1,700 invaders into Puerto Rico at dawn. In the ensuing battle, General Cumberland was knocked from his horse and almost drowned in his heavy armor, had not his men fished him out of the water. The English withdrew. But Cumberland wouldn't give up. 80 hungry men fought on at El Morro. Exhausted, they finally raised the white flag of surrender above the crumbling walls. Cumberland's troops sniffed out the city's plunder, but ironically overlooked the fabled chest of 3 keys. But victory was short-lived. By midsummer, dysentery had wiped out the English invaders. Reconstruction began once again. But as the King of Spain discovered, a fortress is only as good as the men protecting it. Conditions at Puerto Rico were poor. Corsairs plundered, troops were few, food was scarce, dysentery killed many. Some wondered if the king had forgotten his little outpost that guarded the Caribbean. The Dutch took their turn to attack, firing over 4,000 cannonballs at El Morro and boldly marching 800 men into town square. Catching San Juan off guard, short of weapons and food, by some miracle, Puerto Rico's little untrained band of 330 cobblers, tailors, and artisans held off the Dutch for 21 days. In one last heroic attack, the defeated Dutch moved out. By 1625, Philippe IV of Spain declared Puerto Rico as the front and vanguard of all my West Indies, and consequently the most important of them all, and the most coveted by my enemies. San Juan was to become a defense station of the first order. The city was to be completely walled and the forts repaired. A new fort, Castillo de San Cristobal, was to rise 150 feet above sea level at the northeast end of the city for land defense. To protect the rocky Atlantic coast, a small fort called La Perla, or the Pearl, was erected. Over 400 men labored at San Cristobal, convicts, slaves, as well as soldiers. This fort, designed to be the ultimate defense from land attack and a protection for the north coast, is a masterpiece of 18th century military engineering. San Cristobal was reinforced by several barriers, each higher than the one before, strategically placed to protect vulnerable places such as gates and long walls. A system of massive outworks provided defense in depth. Moats followed wall after wall. The highest and most prominent feature was a large gun platform built to protect against invaders from eastern approaches. A dry moat, 12 feet deep and 30 feet wide, surrounded the fort. Originally, a drawbridge crossed the moat to be raised during attack. Remnants of some of the earliest construction hovers over the windy sea. Legend tells that at this lonely sentry box, a Spanish soldier in love with a country maiden arranged to meet her in secret. In the morning, the lovers had disappeared. Some blamed evil forces, naming this sentry box Garita del Diablo, or the Devil's Sentry Box. At both San Cristobal and El Morro, ramps, bridges, and stairways connect subterranean passages throughout the fort network, permitting quick movement of troops to different areas of the fort. They were known as mining galleries because explosives could be set to blow up siege operations. Tunnels to the outworks served as listening posts where sentinels could hear the sound of approaching enemies. Portals cut through sheer rock allowed for ventilation. Dark, damp, underground dungeons impounded prisoners. One Spanish sea captain awaiting execution for mutiny depicted in fresco these ships leaving the harbor. San Cristobal, a citadel in its time, remains hauntingly beautiful today. So complete were the fortifications of San Juan that it became a walled city, only to be entered through guarded gates. The only existing gate intact today, the Gate of San Juan, allowed seafaring men to enter the city to offer prayers of thanks for a safe return. From this gate, a colorful procession welcomed the arrival of the new governor to the city. By the end of the 16th century, San Juan was one of the better fortified places in the Indies. The mighty walls enclosed 200 acres of land and 450 guns stood ready for defense. But piracy was rampant. Puerto Rico was known as such a privateering base that the British called it a nest of pirates. England, again, made a determined attack. 68 vessels armed with 600 guns and 7,000 soldiers blockaded San Juan. Such a massive invasion brought all of Puerto Rico to arms. Local recruits, peasantry, militiamen, even prisoners and pirates to fight for their homeland. To their utter surprise, the enemy sailed out to sea, leaving arms and munitions behind. By some act of fate, Spain held Puerto Rico against international powers for 4 centuries, but Spain's empire was collapsing. By 1830, only Puerto Rico and Cuba remained loyal to Spain. San Juan continued to grow. In 1876, 24,000 people swelled the walled city to capacity. Crowding was unbearable. Once representing protection, the great forts and walls began to symbolize imprisonment. In 1897, the citizenry gathered at Santiago Gate, where in one spectacular blast, the walls came down, and the city opened up with enthusiastic rejoicing. But for Puerto Rico, peace stood at bay. San Juan was startled awake by the thunder of guns. The United States declared war on Spain. The prize? Puerto Rico, the gateway to the Caribbean. True to their allegiance to Spain, artillerymen engaged the ancient cannons, but time had wrought decay. Of the 43 pieces mounted, only 28 guns could shoot, not much of a threat to armored battleships. 2.5 hours later, the victorious American fleet moved out to sea to take another prize, Cuba. Just as the old city walls rose to protect San Juan, today the American flag waves high above the forts as a symbol of protection and liberty for Puerto Rico. Theirs is a dual legacy, rich in American freedom, rich in Spanish tradition. The city that once blew down the walls continues to grow, a mix of old and new. Today, Puerto Rico, the smallest of the islands in the Greater Antilles, is the leading tourist island of the Caribbean, with over 2 million visitors each year. They come to see this extraordinary island where ageless oceans beat upon the rugged shores. Only memories of ancient battles resound from the heavy walls of El Morro and San Cristobal. Lonely sentry boxes beckon the souls of valiant men who stood watch over the centuries. The walled city, now crumbling and subdued by nature, rests from its vigil. What remains is uncommonly beautiful, an homage to history. It is said that on a clear night, Spanish sentries from legions past gather to sit together on the square, remembering the extraordinary forts of old San Juan that stand guard in spirit, a memory of piracy and power forever.